Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing, in which we're going to hear from some more firefighter witnesses. Yes, Mr. Kinnear.
Good morning, sir. The first witness today is Firefighter Michael Wood.
Thank you.
I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God.
That the evidence I shall give.
That the evidence I shall give.
Shall be the truth.
Shall be the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wood. Yes, Mr. Kinnear.
Good morning. Would you please confirm your name for the record?
My name is Michael Wood.
Good morning, Mr. Wood. Many thanks for coming along today. It's much appreciated. On the lectern, there is a blue folder.
Yeah.
And if you open the blue folder and turn to the first tab, there should be your witness statement dated the 29th of January of this year. Is that right?
I can't see the date on it.
Yeah,
I've got it, yeah, 29th.
And if you turn to the next tab,
Yeah.
hopefully there should be your contemporaneous note. The next tab, rather than the next page.
I've got it, yeah.
Probably called tab B.
Yeah, there is, yeah.
And that's your contemporaneous note.
Yeah.
And if you turn to the final tab, hopefully you should find your exhibits, 4 exhibits that you appended to your police statement. Is that right?
That's right.
Have you read those documents recently?
Yes.
And do you confirm their contents are true?
Yes.
And are you content for those documents to stand as your evidence to this inquiry?
Yes.
Mr. Wood, if at any time you need a break, please say so. That's not a problem. Secondly, if any of my questions are unclear at any stage, please say so and I'll rephrase.
Okay.
Now, before we start, could I just ask you some basic questions of background? First of all, is it right that you are a firefighter and at the time of the fire you were based at Brixton?
That's correct.
And that you became a firefighter in 2003?
Correct.
And that the call sign of the appliance you rode on the night was Hotel 242?
That's correct.
And as to timings, the LFB records indicate that you were mobilised at 0205, you were mobile at 0208, and you arrived at the scene at 0228. Does that sound about right to you?
It does, yeah.
Now, the first topic of questions I'd like to discuss with you is BA entry and deployment within the town. Now, you had a number of entries into the tower, so the first one I want to deal with is the very first one.
Right.
Now, when you went into the tower for the first time, is it right to say that the foyer was crowded and chaotic?
Yeah, it was, yeah.
And is it right that you waited there for between 5 and 10 minutes?
Around about that, 10 minutes, yeah.
And did you see any residents passing by you evacuating the tower?
Yes.
Can you remember how many?
No.
Can you remember what condition they were in as they left?
Varied conditions.
And so if you could describe to us the range of conditions you witnessed.
Some were being walked out, some were being carried out.
Were any being assisted out using second BA sets?
I can't remember.
Okay. Now, after some time, you shifted to a room on the left-hand side of the lobby, which you thought was a community room. Is that right?
It was like a space, yeah. I don't know what the purpose of that room was.
And was it at this time, when you were waiting in the lobby, that you saw a small boy say, "My brother died in there"?
I can't remember the exact room. Okay. It was somewhere around the lobby area.
Right. Now, was it around this time that you saw the LFB Commissioner, Danny Cotton, and a senior officer?
Yes.
And is it right that the senior officer addressed the men and women who were in the lobby?
Yes.
And is it right that the senior officer gave a speech in which you were told that, first of all, it was okay to work outside procedures, and secondly, he also said that if anyone didn't want to do that, that was fine as well? Is that a fair summary of what you were told?
That's a fair summary.
And what did you take him to mean by the phrase working outside procedures? What did you think it meant in practice for you?
That it was going to be very difficult because of the nature of the fire, and that we would probably have to do things above and beyond what we'd normally do. within our safety procedures.
And were you content to do that?
I was.
Now, as I understand it, due to congestion in the lobby area, you and others were sent outside the tower after a period of time, is that right?
Correct.
Now, how long can you remember now? I think it's always, I apologise, it's always difficult asking questions about times. Can you remember how long you were waiting outside the tower before your second entry?
Up to 20 minutes. I can't say.
Don't worry, if you can't remember,
Yeah.
you can't, don't worry. Now, if I can turn to your second entry into the tower,
Yeah.
and you went from the lobby to the bridgehead, is that right?
That's right.
And again, was it congested or not congested, the lobby and the bridgehead?
It wasn't as congested as it was the first time. There's still quite a few people about.
And was it congested with firefighters or firefighters and casualties evacuating from higher up the tower?
The same. More firefighters and casualties.
And in terms of the casualties you saw, are you able to describe for us what condition they were as they evacuated the tower?
Again, I can't remember like what casualty was there, what time. Some were being carried out, some were being walked out.
And again, do you remember any evacuating whilst assisted with a second BA set?
I can't remember.
Apologies for putting a particular recollection. Do you recall seeing two Taiwanese women leaving the tower whilst you were waiting at the lobby or the bridgehead?
I can't remember.
Now, you moved to the bridgehead. Can you remember on what floor the bridgehead was at that stage?
It'd been moved. It was on the ground, or the first.
Are you sure about that at this stage?
No.
No. And did you see a watch manager, Morrison, at that
Yes.
stage when you were at the bridgehead?
Yeah.
And is it right that you were put into a queue with firefighter Lawrence and ahead of you were firefighters Sonson and Cuthbert?
Correct.
And what brief were you given at the bridgehead?
To check the rooms, the flats, sorry, on the 4th and the 5th floor.
And were you also told to carry out a right-hand search?
That's correct.
And were you given any further detail by the watch manager before you were deployed?
Not that I remember.
So no detail of any particular flats or any particular occupants of flats that you ought to be looking out for or rescuing?
I can't remember.
Now, if I can talk to you about that deployment to the 4th and 5th floor, and first of all, the conditions of the stairwell, you tallied out at 0347. Does that sound about right?
I'll have to take your word for it. I wasn't looking at the time.
And is it right that you encountered a man on the stairs in the foyer who was in a frantic state saying he'd lost his wife?
That's correct.
Now, you continued with your task and went up the tower, is that right?
That's right.
Can you describe for us the conditions you encountered as you left the bridgehead and started to make your way up to the 4th floor?
Yeah, it was smoky.
And can you describe for us the density? How thick was the smoke?
It got thicker as we went through onto the floor.
And what colour was it?
It's like black.
Now, as you were going up, is it right that you saw 3 firefighters come past you, and you're not too sure it was either on the 2nd, 3rd or 4th floors, with a female casualty?
Correct.
And looking back on it now, are you able to be more precise about the floor on which you encountered the female casualty being brought down by the 3 firefighters?
I'd say it was the 4th.
And you say that she was almost, if not unconscious. Is that a fair summary of her condition that you witnessed?
She was, yeah.
Yeah. And they were really struggling with her, is that right?
Yeah. They were collapsing.
And you took the lady from them and carried her down, is that right?
That's right.
And then you took her to the mezzanine. You took her to the mezzanine, and then is it right that you went back up the tower to regroup with Firefighter Lawrence?
That's what I've done, yeah.
And Firefighter Lawrence had stayed up, had he, at or about the 4th floor whilst you took the lady down?
Yeah, because he was still going up.
And as you were going up to see Firefighter Lawrence, you met a man coming down the stairs, is that right?
A casualty, yeah.
Yeah. And he was coughing, spluttering, saying, "Help me."
He was, yeah.
And in your statement, you describe his legs giving way.
Yeah, he collapsed when
And
he
then,
seen me,
and then you describe him half fainting into your arms. Is that a fair summary?
sort of thing.
Yeah. And you carried him down.
I did.
Yeah. And then did you leave him at the mezzanine or on the ground floor?
Mezzanine. Because then the people from the BA entry control could see us and they come running up.
And when you brought down the First Lady and then this gentleman, did you brief anyone at the bridgehead as to where you'd found these individuals?
I can't remember, I just got back up to do what I had to do.
Okay. After you brought the man down to the mezzanine, you then went back up to the fourth floor, is that right? And that you met firefighters Sonson and Cuthbert, who said they'd searched the fourth floor, they had
Yeah.
2 more flats to go, and suggested you went to the 5th floor, is that right?
Sounds about right.
And so you went up to the 5th floor. Can you describe for us what you encountered on the 5th floor?
Yeah, it was really hot and smoky. And we went in a room, in a flat. The front door was burnt off. And just, it was all full of fire. Just checking if there was anyone in there, but it's so what, like, I knew there'd be no one in there, but I checked it anyway, just in case. There was no one in there.
No. And can you describe the condition of the interior of the flat you went to search?
It was all on fire. And it was really hot.
How far into the flat were you able to go?
Right through it.
So from the entrance door to the far wall with the window in?
Yeah.
How many of the flats did you search on the 5th floor?
2.
And then, because of the temperature and the circumstances you encountered, is it right that you went back down to the bridgehead?
Yeah, my air started running out.
Okay. And had your alarm sounded by this stage?
I think so. I think so.
And you returned to the bridgehead and you tallied in at 0402. Again, is that something, a precise time you can't remember now?
I wouldn't know the time.
Okay. And did you brief the bridgehead of the conditions you'd found on the 5th floor?
Yeah, would have done, but I can't remember what I said.
Okay. Can you remember who you briefed at the bridgehead?
No.
Now, you had a third entry into the tower later on in the evening, and is it right that you were deployed to the 9th or 10th floor to remove a body?
The 11th.
The 11th. And in short, you found the body of a deceased woman on the stairwell between, was it the 10th and the 11th floor?
Like on the 11th.
Now,
As far as I remember.
and we don't need to go into it, but for a range of reasons, and after some time, you were unable to bring the deceased woman out of the tower, is that right?
Yeah, we never got her all the way down.
Okay. And how far down the tower were you able to take the casualty?
To the 9th floor.
Mr. Wood, thank you very much. Those are all the questions I have for you at this stage. I don't think there are going to be any further questions, sir, but if I may ask you briefly to rise.
Would you like a few minutes just to check?
Sir, yes, thank you.
Mr. Wood, it sometimes happens that although Mr. Kinnear thinks he's finished asking questions, he finds he hasn't. So we're going to rise for a couple of minutes now. Please don't talk to anyone about your evidence while you're out of the room. And we'll come back in, do you need 5 minutes? Probably best, isn't it?
I think so, thank you,
We'll
sir.
come back at 10:20,
All right,
and then we'll see if there are more questions for you.
All right.
All right? I'd like to go with the usher then, please. Right, 20 past then, please.
Thanks, sir.
Well, Mr. Kinnear.
No supplemental questions, sir, so possibly it just leaves us to thank Mr. Wood for his
Well,
efforts.
let's get Mr. Wood back in just to explain the position to him. Okay. Well, Mr. Wood, I'm pleased to say that there are no further questions to put to you. So it just remains for me to thank you very much indeed for coming to give your evidence, and you're now free to go, so the usher will look after you.
All right.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Kerr.
So the next witness is Watch Manager Daniel Morrison, who will be examined by Miss Curtin. So there will be a changeover of both counsel and witness. There's no need to change the furniture, I'm told.
So I probably don't need to rise.
You don't need to rise, sir.
No, very good, thank you.
And repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morrison. Yes, Mr. Curtin.
Can you please confirm your name for the record?
Daniel Robert Morrison.
Good morning, Mr. Morrison. First of all, thank you very much for coming along to give evidence today. It's very much appreciated. I'm going to be asking you a series of questions about your experience at the incident. If anything that I ask is not clear, please say so and I will rephrase the question. If you want to break at any time, that's absolutely fine. Just let me know.
No worries.
Can I start by asking you to look in the front of the blue folder that is in front of you? And the first document there should be a copy of your witness statement dated the 5th of January 2018. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And for the record, that's MET *000 80586. Have you read a copy of that statement?
Yes, I have,
recently?
yes.
And can you confirm that the contents are true to the best of your knowledge?
Indeed, yes.
Thank you. And behind the second tab should be a copy of your contemporaneous note.
Yes, that's correct.
And again, for the record, that's MET *000 5414. And then behind the third tab, we have your exhibit, which is 3 separate hand-drawn sketches that you've produced.
That's correct, yes.
And that's MET *000 15753. Are you happy for those documents to stand as your evidence to the inquiry?
I am indeed, yes.
Thank you very much. If we can just start with some basics. You are currently a watch manager, I believe, based at Beckenham Fire Station.
I am indeed, yes. Yep.
And as at June 2017, you were based at Tooting Fire Station,
Yes.
and your rank there was a crew manager plus.
Yes.
The plus indicating that you can act as watch manager if required.
Yes.
But I think it's right that on the night of the incident, so the night of the 13th of June, you were in your capacity as crew manager. Is that correct?
I was indeed, although my collar markings still had my watch manager rank on, which I believe in previous witness statements is why I've been referred to as a watch manager.
I see.
So if we see photographs, as we may,
Yes.
you'll be wearing a white helmet.
I'll be wearing a yellow helmet, but because we had our
right.
helmets off most of the time, it's denoted by the markings on your collar, and so I still have my watch manager rank markings on.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, that's very helpful. And you were on the night driving Tooting's pump, which is call sign Hotel 352, is that right?
I was in charge, so I wasn't driving. I was in charge of Hotel 352, yes.
Thank you. And the LFB documents that we have indicate that Hotel 352 was on the road at 02:09 and it arrived at the incident at 02:25. Do those times sound about right to you?
Yes, yeah, roughly.
And you say, and this is in your witness statement, I'm looking at page 5, the second paragraph, and this is 8 lines down. Mr. Morrison, all the documents I'm going to ask you to look at will come up on the screen. You can see the big screen there.
Yes.
There is also a screen to the right of you.
All right, yes, yep, thank you.
Which might be easier. And you explain that on arrival, we tried to find out where the BA staging area was, and someone pointed towards the tower.
Yes.
Were you aware that by this stage in the incident there was an initial BA staging area being set up by the leisure centre?
No, we weren't. As I walked across the green with my crew, I asked another firefighter where the BA staging area was, and they pointed towards there. So that's where I sent my crew.
Okay. And so you sent your crew to the tower, and you then went to book in at the command unit, is
Yes.
that right? And you've marked the location of the command unit on your exhibit, and I'm going to ask Paul, the documents director, just to bring that up briefly. So that's at the bottom of the page. That looks like it's the command unit that was parked on Grenfell Road. Do you know if that's right?
I wouldn't know the name of the road.
If we put it another way, it wasn't the command unit that was on Bowmore Road, which I think is where you say you'd parked.
I wouldn't know where Bowmore Road is.
No. Okay.
Sorry.
Do you know if it was CU7 or CU8?
I wouldn't know.
Do you remember who was on it when you went to hand in your board?
No, I don't.
No. Do you remember if FSG information was taken on the command unit?
No, I wouldn't know.
No. Okay. And you then say, and this is the third paragraph of page 5, the third line down, that a station manager directed you to go up to the entry control point on the 3rd floor.
Yes.
And so we're clear, the entry control point is located where the bridgehead is that right?
Yes, that's right, yes.
And you entered the tower through the main entrance.
Yes.
Do you remember when you were in the ground floor lobby seeing Watch Manager Williams there?
At that point, the entrance lobby wasn't that congested,
Right.
but I didn't take note of who was in there, I'm afraid.
Did you see anyone transcribing FSG information onto the wall of the ground floor lobby?
No.
No. And you then say, this is over the page, at page 6 of your witness statement, and the first paragraph, 4 lines from the bottom, you say, I saw 2 watch managers, this is once you're at the bridgehead, Brian O'Keefe from Kensington, I think that should be Brian O'Keefe, is that right?
Yes.
Yes. And Louisa De Silvo,
Yes.
with a crew manager and a firefighter whose names you don't remember.
No.
Do you remember anyone else being on the bridgehead at this point?
It was very congested. They seemed to be the only ones that were there in a managing capacity. So
I was going to ask who you understood to be in charge of the bridgehead.
my understanding at that time was Brian O'Keefe was in charge of the bridgehead, and Lou De Silva was in charge of the entry control.
Do you have any recollection of Group Manager Welsh being on the bridgehead at this point?
No.
And what about Group Manager Goulbourne?
No, not at that time.
Not on the 3rd floor?
No, not on that time.
And you explain, and this is the last line of the same paragraph on page 6, you told them that you were there to assist them, and you were told to take on the role of communications officer.
Yes, that's correct.
And just moving down to the next paragraph, you go on to explain what that role involves. And you say the BA crews would be briefed by the officer committing them into the building, and I would be their point of contact via a dedicated channel on the radio, in this case channel 6. I would pass on any information that needed to be transmitted or received to the entry control officer. All communications would go through me. Just breaking that down, who was it who tasked you with this role?
I don't remember. It would have been either Watch Manager O'Keefe or Watch Manager De Silva. But it was the next role that an officer would then slip into as part of the sort of bridgehead team.
And was the person who briefed you, whoever that was, were they able to give you a briefing?
No, it does come under one of the policies that is what a communications officer would do. So there wasn't a necessity to brief me.
Were they able to tell you anything, for example, about how many BA crews had already been committed?
That information wasn't passed on, but it was easily visible. Having a look at the entry control boards, you could see how many tallies were in. So it wouldn't necessarily be information, timely information that was necessary at that point.
And what about any information about any difficulties that have been experienced up until that point with radio communications?
I don't remember anything being passed on like that.
Could you give us an idea, just so we're aware, of the sort of information that BA crews, once they are committed under air, might need to be communicating back to the bridgehead via the comms officer?
So they're, as part of the policy, they're supposed to inform us, keep us updated with their air that they have left, any predominant landmarks that they come across. So if they've reached the floor that they're supposed to search, they'll let us know. If they come across any casualties, they would let us know. If they're having any difficulties, all that information would be expected to be passed back to the bridgehead or the entry control.
And just so we're clear on the limits of the role of a communications officer, would a communications officer also be involved in briefing crews before they're committed?
Initially on the third floor, no, and as per the policy, not generally. But when we moved down to the ground floor, the logistics and the geography of where everyone was positioned meant that I was the closest to the crews being committed, and at the base of the stairs. And so a lot of the time the briefs would be passed on through me.
Thank you. We are going to come on to your time at the ground floor. Thank you. And what about taking debriefings from crews who were returning from deployments? If we just focus on your time at the bridgehead on the third floor, is that something that you were involved in?
Yes, they would come back. Again, they would look normally for the closest officer, and generally that was me. So when I arrived, there were quite a few crews already committed. So as they were coming down and tallying out, there was information being passed back and forward.
And I now have just a few questions for you about how radio comms were functioning. And if we focus again at this point, just during your time at the bridgehead when it was on the third floor.
Yes.
And if I can ask you to have a look at page 7 of your statement. Apologies for jumping around a little bit. And this is the third line down, where you say the radios were only functional up to a few floors, and then the comms were lost as you went higher. Was that the case right from the start, right when you took on the role of comms officer?
Yes. There was initially maybe a 5 or 6 floor capability, and that soon dwindled down to just a few.
And to be clear, that's 5 or 6 floors above the bridgehead, right?
Yes.
So if the bridgehead is on the third floor, do you remember the specific floor? Would that mean that it was?
No. There was, as the crews went higher, we lost comms with them after a few floors.
And did that remain the constant upper limit throughout the incident, or did it vary?
Yes. No, it only came down from there.
And did you make the BA crews who were about to be committed aware of the difficulties before they went under air?
There would have been discussions about comms, and because of that, we had actually reverted to writing information on the reflective strips, so that because there was no way of them double checking where they were supposed to go if they'd forgotten.
And just moving a little bit on in your witness statement, this is staying on page 7, the second paragraph. You say it was early on that there was a big overload of information being passed about. There were crews reporting they were bringing casualties down. There were crews reporting they couldn't complete their brief as they found casualties on the stairway that needed assistance. To be clear, this is BA crews who are committed under air communicating with you on Channel 6 on the radio.
Both on Channel 6 and on their way past the bridgehead to take their casualties downstairs.
I see. And specifically, when a crew was reporting to you that they hadn't been able to complete a brief, either once they're in the tower and they're communicating on radio or when they come back down, what did you do with that information?
It would have been stored, written down whether on on the forward information board or on the wall, and we would be looking to get another crew in to complete that task.
And when you say that you'd be looking to get another crew in to complete it, did you have any involvement then in selecting which crew would be briefed as a substitute crew, as it were, or?
No, it was the next crew available at that moment in time.
And were you involved in them briefing them and telling them where to go, or was that someone else?
I was involved in the brief itself because I would also be required to know their brief, so that communications between us, if it was possible, I was aware of where they're going. So in one way or another I was involved in the brief. Whether that brief had been passed down to me to relay to the crew or not, I can't remember.
And you say a little bit further on in your statement, and this is the second paragraph, 8 lines from the bottom, you say crews also reported that on a lot of floors they went to, they didn't have water and conditions were too dangerous to progress to where they needed to get to. Do you remember which floors specifically had no water?
No, I don't, I'm afraid.
No. And do you have any recollection of how long that went on for, if it was a constant?
No,
or?
it did seem to be a continuous theme throughout the hours I was at the bridgehead.
I now have a few questions for you, and again, we're focusing still on the time when the bridgehead was on the 3rd floor, on the FSG information that was coming in. And I'm going to ask you to look back at page 6 of your witness statement, and this is the bottom paragraph. And you say, when I arrived, the FSG were being passed from the command unit to us at the bridgehead to brief crews where to go to. Initially, I didn't know if the FSG were being relayed by radio or by slips of paper. And you then go on to talk about what was happening when you're on the ground floor, which we're going to come on to. But sticking with the 3rd floor for the moment, do you now have any clearer recollection of how information was reaching you when the bridgehead was on the 3rd floor?
Not on the 3rd floor, no.
Not on the 3rd floor. Did you have any involvement in receiving that FSG information when the bridgehead was on the 3rd floor?
Not to my recollection.
And did you have any involvement in recording the FSG information as it came in?
I can remember writing on the wall. I think, well, no, I don't. I know some of the information I wrote on the wall was information received by crews as to where they were going to those, but the actual FSG information I wasn't aware of.
Right, okay. Do you remember Louisa De Silvo writing on the wall?
Yes.
She was managing the FSG information. Can I ask you just to look very briefly at one of her photographs of the 3rd floor wall? It's ref MET 000 15819, and this is an exhibit, one of the exhibits to Louisa De Silvo's witness statement. Is that familiar to you?
Yes.
Are you able to recognise any of that handwriting as your own?
Not in that picture. The Shoreditch and the Lambeth look like my handwriting.
Your handwriting?
Yes.
Do you remember anything specifically about those deployments?
I remember Flat 113 being a constant target for us throughout, and just having problems actually getting there.
Okay. Do you remember anything more specific about Flat 113?
No, not anything pertinent.
Okay. And you say, and this is the very bottom of page 6, the last 2 words of page 6, BA crews, and then going over the page, at this time, were only dealing with FSG calls. And I just want to clarify what you mean here. Are you saying that all the BA crews who were committed were only committed in response to specific FSG information rather than firefighting?
To my knowledge, yes.
So you don't have any recollection of firefighters being committed from the 3rd floor to deal with firefighting?
No.
Do you know if that was because someone at the bridgehead had made a specific decision to only use BA crews for FSG calls, or are you just describing what was going on?
I wouldn't know the reasoning behind it. The bridgehead was very, very crowded, and we still didn't have enough crews for the jobs being detailed for them. So they were the priority for the BA crews.
Okay, thank you. We're now going to move on to when the bridgehead moved down to the ground floor. And we have an approximate time for that of 3:08 or a little bit later. Does that sound about right to you? And again, I just want to start by asking a few questions on comms and how those were functioning once you were down on the ground floor. And this is at page 8 of your witness statement, the second paragraph, the last line. You say, I can't be specific with times, but we were starting to struggle with communications above the 5th and 6th floors. Was this broadly the same situation that you were encountering when the bridgehead was on the 3rd floor?
Yes.
And you say, this is the bottom paragraph of page 8, that you placed a firefighter at the base of the stairs to relay communications, but it wasn't working. Can you just explain what the firefighter was doing? How was the firefighter relaying communications?
So the firefighter, we were hoping might act as a radio booster, so we could pass information to the firefighter, and then if they could then go 5 floors above them, we were reaching the 7th floor, just in the hope to gain better communication.
So effectively acting as a runner with a radio going up into the
Yes.
tower. Do you know who that firefighter was?
At one point, I'm afraid I don't know her name, but it was a firefighter from Shoreditch.
And you also refer, this is again at the very bottom of page 8 of your statement, to getting an aerial repeater from the fire rescue unit, which is designed to boost radio signal.
Yes.
And you say, just over the page, second line down, they took a while to put them in place, and in the meantime, all that could be heard on channel 6 was a high-pitched noise, and this made hearing more difficult at the bridgehead. Did the high-pitched noise occur just for the period you were trying to get the aerial repeater installed, or were you installing the repeater?
No, the high-pitched noise occurred on channel 6. We looked to change channels and also get the repeaters put in place. It just meant the high-pitched noise rendered the radios unusable.
Right. So would it be right that you were trying to install the repeaters in order to address the
Yes,
problem that's
indeed.
being created by the
Yes.
high-pitched noise? Do you remember roughly what time this occurred?
I'm afraid I don't know.
No. And how long did it go on for, do you know?
The high-pitched noise, it only went on for maybe 5 or 10 minutes because we had to turn off that channel because it just made the atmosphere inaudible, so nothing could be heard.
I see. And you go on, and this might lead us on to the next point, which is just at the top of the same page of your witness statement, you talk about channel 2. And you say a decision was made to change to channel 2, and a station manager told me that we needed permission from the command unit. I politely told him to go and check, as we were already using channel 2 and we had committed crews using channel 2. Does it follow from the discussion we were just having about the high-pitched noise in channel 6 that you started using channel 2 in response to...
In response to the high-pitched noise, we changed to channel 2 just so that we had a chance of some communication. It's a channel that should be used by officers on the fire ground.
Right.
But it was the only one available for us to use.
And whose decision was it to start using channel 2?
Myself.
Do you remember if a message got back to the command unit that you were now using channel 2 to communicate
The
with
station manager, who informed me I needed permission, I told him to go and ask who he wants to ask, but we were using channel 2. So he went off to just clarify that.
Do you know why he thought that permission was required?
Policy states that permission is required. I'm not too sure on the implications of using different radio channels. So.
I'm going to ask Paul to bring up just briefly a passage from your contemporaneous notes, and it's on the second page, second paragraph, 4 lines down. And you're talking about this decision to start using Channel 2. So we made a decision to change the new crews to Channel 2, keeping Channel 6 open for crews already in. Can you explain how that works, how you're able to maintain comms with BA crews over 2 separate channels at the same time?
By using 2 different radios. Each radio, everybody's handheld radio can be changed to a different channel.
I see.
And so everybody had the ability to have their radio on Channel 2 or Channel 6. Because we already had crews in the building on Channel 6, we kept one radio at Channel 6 and then a separate radio at Channel 2 for the new crews going in.
And was that a manageable system?
It's not ideal, but we managed.
Did it assist with comms?
No, because we still had the problem on Channel 6 and we still had sort of black spots above the 5th or 6th floor.
And you refer later on in your witness statement, we don't need to go there, but we know that you were relieved by a crew manager from Wandsworth much later on into the incident. And the inquiries received a statement from him. He referred to when he was being briefed by you, you'd explained that there were problems on Channel 6. He mentioned that you might have been using Channel 1. Does that ring any bells, or does that...
No.
No.
No, at no point was I using Channel 1. The radio traffic alone would have been too busy for the bridgehead to be using Channel 1 for BA crews.
And just finally, on the issue of comms when you're on the ground floor, there are a couple of entries in what we refer to as the short incident log that you might be able to help us with, or you might not. I'm going to ask Paul to bring those up. It's Ref Met 000138330. Thank you. You might have seen this document in the context of the inquiry already, Mr. Morrison. It's a log of the key messages that were going back and forth between the incident ground and control. And we have an entry at 034412, and again a similar one at 034420. And this is CU8, which was the incident command unit at the time, requesting urgent assistance by a radio engineer to assist with Channel 2 for Fireground. And then we've got a little bit later on, this is page 32 of the same document, the same message again at 0518 and 2 seconds. Do you remember requesting technical assistance with Channel 2 at any time? Do you think those messages have come from you?
No, that would be above my pay grade. That would be for one of the senior officers in the command unit to facilitate any medium outside what we carry.
Do you remember a radio engineer assisting at any point?
No, not at all.
Okay. And now just moving on to FSG information, again, how that was being managed once you were on the ground floor. And if I can ask you to turn up or Paul to turn up your statement again, this is page 8. And the second paragraph, you say, as I looked towards the base of the stairs, the green walls I was writing on were behind me with the ECB next to me. I was writing the call signs of crews going in and what we call them over the radio. It's important that each call sign is individual, and we have a procedure that your call sign would be the position where you'd be writing on your appliance, and they were given a call sign. It was by now that we were not sending up crews of 2, but crews of 4 and 5. With crews arriving and wearing EDBA, it was easier to have my own list of who was going in and to where. I was physically speaking to them myself and crossing them out when they came down. Just first of all, is it usually the role of a communications officer to be making those kind of written records at the bridgehead?
No.
And we know we've already established that Louisa De Silva was also writing on that same green wall at the bridgehead, and we're going to look at a couple of photos that she made of the information that was collected there. But can I just start by clarifying whether the list that you say you were making, so who was going in and who was coming out, was separate to the list that Louisa De Silva was making, or were you both contributing to the same list?
No, we all had separate sections of the wall.
I see. And if I can now ask about the processes that were being followed in relation to the FSG information that was coming in to the bridgehead. And there's a passage in your statement that deals with this. It's the page 9, second paragraph. from the top, the end of the first line, you say, I was getting the FSG calls from a station manager who was bringing them in. The FSG was relayed between myself and the others at the bridgehead. The crews were given the FSG personally by me, and I asked if they understood the conditions they were going into and the task that was asked of them, and to get there if they could. Just want to break that down again.
Yes.
When you say that you were getting FSG calls from a station manager who brought them in, again, do you have any recollection of what form the information was coming to you?
So they were coming on individual sheets from Firefighter's notepad.
I see.
And it would be a name, if there was a name, the flat number, the floor number, and any other details. Because of the geography of where we were all standing, I was the first person that they were meeting, so they'd be handing them to me, and then I'd be passing that information on to Watch Manager De Silva and Watch Manager O'Keefe, and then we would be looking to send another crew up, and whilst they were annotating on their walls, I'd write the details of the call sign on mine and brief the crews where they were going.
And do you remember if that system, so getting the information on individual slips from firefighter notepads, was that in place right from the start when the bridgehead was on the ground floor, or was there any change at all?
From memory, it took a while for that to sort of progress to that. I can't remember it being passed on in any other form. I can only remember the notepads.
Thank you. And I'm just going to ask Paul to bring up briefly, just by way of example, document LFB quadruple 0 1929. And this is an exhibit from Mr. O'Keefe's witness statement. And these are slips that he says that he found in his tunic at the end of the night. I'm not proposing to ask you anything about the specific information on there unless there is something that you can recall. But just as an example, is that the kind of form in which you were receiving FSG information to your recollection?
No, there was a bit more detail than that. They were a single, FSG was on a single piece of paper.
I see.
So they were individual.
So would they have been not? Were you talk? I think you said firefighter notepads rather than control information forms.
Yes, yes.
And
so it would be the same size as those bits of paper.
I see.
But the information on the bit of paper wouldn't have a list of flats like that. It would be an individual flat and a floor and any details.
Okay, thank you. And when you say that the station manager gave that information to you, that was you personally as well as other people on the bridgehead, or do you think you were the main conduit?
So the physical piece of paper would have come to me because where I was standing closest to the door. Normally they would also be shouting out the information to inform all of us, but then between the three of us we would then one was writing down the floor number, one was writing down the flat number. At that time, without the plans, it was very difficult to know where on each floor each individual flat was. You couldn't say, oh, you know, it's the second door to your right, because we didn't know. So yeah, it was literally just that information, and then the crews would come in, and again, because I was the first one they were coming to, it just evolved into me telling them and briefing them.
And do you remember who the station manager who was bringing you the information was?
I'm afraid not, no.
Does the name Station Manager Wolfenden mean anything to you?
Only through the inquiry, but personally, no.
Okay. Do you have any recollection of slips of paper being brought to you by the BA crews who were about to be committed rather than through a station manager?
No, I don't know.
And who was making decisions about where to commit specific BA crews to in response to the FSG information that was being received? Was that part of your role?
Between the three of us, it was sort of a general discussion between the three of us, and then there were a few that became a little bit more of a priority because of the number of times they came up, and also the people that were inside.
Did you have discussions about how to prioritise FSGs and deployments of BA crews?
No, it was, apart from a couple that came up, and they became naturally a priority because of the amount of times they came up. It normally was we've got another one, the next crew in, and it was just a conveyor belt.
I'm going to now ask you to look at a couple of photos that we have of the writing on the green wall on the bridgehead.
Yes.
I'm going to ask first of all if you are...
Well, I was going to say, before you do, could I
Yes,
just ask one
of
question?
course.
You received these slips of paper
Yes, sir.
on Firefighter notebook
Yes.
sheets. What did you do with them? Did you have a systematic way of passing them to one of the other people at the bridgehead?
No, once the information was annotated onto the wall, those slips became void, and when I was relieved, I had a handful of them that was passed on.
Right, but you retained them while you were there
Yes,
carrying out your role,
yes.
and then what, you gave them to someone else when you left? Or?
I can't remember passing them on, but they would have been passed on.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. Yes. Thank you.
Ms Morrison, are you okay to look at a couple of the photos of
Yes,
the
yeah,
FSG
by all means, yes,
information?
please.
Thank you. So I'm going to show you two exhibits again from Louisa De Silvo's witness statement. I'm going to ask Paul to put them up side by side. And the first one, which, Paul, if you could put on the left-hand side of the screen, is MET 000 15820. And on the right, there it is, that's MET 000 15817. And Mr Morrison, the reason I've asked Paul to put them up like that is because Louisa De Silvo said when she gave evidence that she thought that the photo that you see on the right was a continuation of the information that you see in the photograph on the left.
Yes, so that large section in the photo on the left,
Yes.
not the grid on the left, but the four lists,
Yes,
they're all mine.
I see.
So that section, yes.
Thank you. And again, do you remember anything in particular about the specific FSGs, specific flats?
Only difficulty getting to one, but that was the only one that only 113. The fact that it just kept coming up, but there was no other flat that.
Okay, thank you. I now want to ask you about something that you say in page 10.
Sorry, before we
Yes.
hit that picture, could we get the pictures up again, please? You were writing down call signs.
Yes, sir.
Could we just look at an example? I don't know whether it's possible to enlarge this and retain its legibility, but I'd just like to see the sort of thing you were writing down, if you could. It's quite difficult to... Right, is that, we can see a whole column on the right-hand side of the enlargement there. Is that a list of call signs?
Yes, so there was four lists of call signs there.
Yeah.
Initially, crews were coming as they were on their own appliance,
Yeah.
but towards the end, it was because of firefighters wanting to get back in. It was literally who else can I go in with, and so we were making up call signs just so that we don't duplicate them.
Yeah.
So you might have one from East Ham, two from Shoreditch, and one from Tooting going in, and we would have to work out a call sign for them.
And then we can see someone has crossed out.
Yeah,
Call
so as they
signs.
came out, we'd put down how many were in the crew.
Yeah.
So the circled ×2, ×4, ×5 would be how many were in that crew, their call sign, and then any other details that we would need.
And I suspect, well, at least I think I know what it means, but when you put a line through it...
It means they were out.
Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
So now, Mr Morrison, I'm going to take you to the first paragraph of page 10 of your statement, which will come up on the screen. And you say a lot of the tactics and decisions were being made by Commander Pat Goulbourne, who was in charge of the bridgehead. And again, this is when the bridgehead is on the ground floor.
Yes. Yes.
I only remember seeing him the first time when we relocated the bridgehead down to the foyer, and he was stood on the first flight of stairs. Our priority for a long time was to get crews in and deal with FSG. Firefighters were getting to their FSG and coming down with casualties. Some, however, couldn't get to complete their task as they had come across casualties on the stairs, or being told by other crews that there were casualties in the flats that they'd just come out of. Decisions were made because of the difficulties the crews were having getting up the stairs and crews helping casualties down the stairs. A decision was made not to prioritise FSG calls, but to start searching floor by floor. Just to be clear here, you refer to Commander Pat Goulbourne in that paragraph.
Yes.
Was the decision to start this systematic floor-by-floor search his decision, or was that someone else's?
My belief is that it was his decision, but it was very late on. It was very late on that morning.
When you say very late on, do you have any idea how long after the bridge had moved to the ground floor?
No, I'm afraid not.
And when you describe the decision as one not to prioritise FSG calls, did someone at the time say, we're not prioritising FSG calls anymore? Or is that you looking back?
No, it was just a change in tactic. Because of our inability to communicate with crews, our inability to, in a timely fashion, send another crew up because they can't achieve their goal. There was also cases where FFGs were moving between flats. The tactic was decided that maybe we should clear each floor by floor, and work our way up. And so we started the lower floors with SDBA and the upper floors with EDBA.
I see. And who was it who decided which floor a particular BA crew would be committed to?
It was systematic, so we started at the bottom. We almost put the tower into two sectors, an EDBA sector and an SDBA sector, and we started from the bottom of each sector and worked up.
This might be linked to a passage in your contemporaneous note, if I can ask Paul to bring it up. It's page 2, and the second paragraph from the bottom. And you say SDBA crews started to be committed to the lower floors and EDBA to floors above floor 9. Are you talking about the same?
Yes. Before that, when we were still answering FSGs, depending on where they were, we would look at the ability of a crew to get to them. So if it was on an upper floor, we would be looking at EDBA crews. So it was a tactic that we used before changing to a systematic search.
So just to be clear, on the decision that EDBA would go to floors above floor 9, was that part of the change in tactics, as you've described it, in the systematic floor-by-floor search?
No, it was something we were using before with the normal FSGs, just on the realisation that the standard duration crews weren't getting up that high. So if we had an FSG call higher, we would be looking to commit an EDBA crew rather than an SDBA crew.
And at the time when you implemented this systematic floor-by-floor approach, were you aware of anything going on the other side of the glass partition, the ground floor lobby, in terms of management of FSG information there?
No.
Do you know if anyone ever communicated back to the command unit that there had been this change in approach?
No, I don't.
Don't know. What about the station manager who you say was bringing in slips of information?
I don't recall, I'm afraid.
And I'm going to ask Paul to bring your contemporaneous note back up, please. And this is same page, third paragraph from the bottom. And you say, although the methodical approach had been implemented, and I think there you're referring to the systematic floor-by-floor approach, but say if that's not correct.
If I'm honest, I don't recall.
You can't recall?
No. I know we had we did have an EDBA crew that went missing for a while, and we had to send another crew in to look for them. But yeah, I can't recall that. Sorry.
Do you know, just focusing on the first part of that sentence?
No.
And
Yes. Yeah.
the methodical approach, and then you say crews were still being redirected for FSGs. Are you able to remember what you might have meant? No.
No.
Okay. Do you remember there ever being a discussion whilst you were at the bridgehead when it was on the ground floor between senior officers about who was in charge of where to commit BA crews to?
No, I don't.
Do you remember a decision ever being taken not to commit any crews at all above a specific floor in the building?
No, I don't.
And finally, Ms Morrison, I just have a few brief questions for you on the supply of BA wearers.
Yes.
And EDBA specifically, and you make one comment about this. This is page 12 of your witness statement. In the last paragraph, 4 lines down, you say, I believe that if we'd had more EDBA sets earlier on, we may have been able to reach people trapped on the higher floors. Did you have concerns about EDBA resources specifically on the night of the incident itself?
As the incident progressed, we did, just because the inability for SDBA to reach affected floors.
Do you remember, and apologies again if I'm asking impossible questions, do you remember a broad time of when that started to become a concern for those who were at the bridgehead?
I would have said I was aware of it on the ground floor, but it's something that didn't pass my mind on the 3rd floor.
And do you know if there were ever discussions between those managing the bridgehead, either when it was on the 3rd floor or when it was on the ground floor, about possibly committing EDBA exclusively and dispensing with SDBA?
There was discussions about sending in solely EDBA, but at the time, the manpower, we still had SDBA that were able to reach the lower floors, which is why we tried to look at sending crews where they could get to.
And were those discussions when the bridgehead was on the 3rd floor or on the ground floor?
On the ground floor.
And do you remember who was involved in those discussions?
I don't, I'm afraid.
Okay. Miss Morrison, I have no further questions for you. It may be that there are a couple more that arise.
Yes.
So if I could ask
You'd like
for
to
the
have a break?
usual 5 minutes,
Yes,
please.
I'm just wondering whether at this stage we might indulge ourselves by having a slightly longer break.
I think we can probably afford to, yes.
Yes, good. Mr Morrison, it does sometimes occur that additional questions occur to counsel when they think they've finished. So we'll have a break now for about 10 minutes. And then we'll see after that whether there are more questions that they want to ask you.
Okay.
Right? So while you're out of the room, please don't talk to anyone about the content of your evidence. And we'll resume at 11:20. And now perhaps you could go to the usher. She'll look
Thank
after
you very
you.
much.
All right? Thank you. Right, at 11:20 then, please. Well done, Ms. Curtin. Any more questions?
So just a few supplemental
Yes.
questions.
All right. Let's ask Mr. Morrison to come back in then,
Thank
please.
you, sir.
I think just a few more questions, Mr. Morrison.
Yes.
All right. Yes, Ms. Curtin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morrison. Going to ask, I'm afraid, to look back at your witness statement just briefly. This is page 3, and it's the bottom paragraph, and you're talking about training and high-rise training specifically,
Yes.
and policy, and you refer, I'll just wait for it to come up on the screen so you can see the context. This is 4 lines down. You say, the brigade has a high-rise black and white policy and what our procedures are. And the question is simply, do you mean something specific by a black and white policy?
Yes, just that it's down in writing as regards to what our procedures are at high-rise incident. So there is a reference point.
And do you know which policy you're referring to specifically there?
So some of it, some of what we used that night would come under the BA policy,
Right.
and some is high-rise, firefighting in high-rise buildings.
Thank you very much. And then one question about when you first went up to the bridgehead on the 3rd floor, and you say that you could see how many BA crews had been committed because it was obvious from the entry control
Yes.
boards. Could you tell us, is it possible to tell from the entry control boards whether crews that have been committed are EDBA or SDBA wearers? Is that something that's shown on the boards?
Yes, but at that time I don't remember seeing any EDBA.
And just another question about what was on the bridgehead when it was on the 3rd floor. Do you remember seeing a forward information board there?
Yes.
Can I ask Paul to bring that up? The document is MET 000-18749. Do you know if that's the same forward information board that you saw?
I'm afraid I wouldn't know the contents of it. I knew that it was being used, but the contents of it, it was the other side of the entry control boards to where I was stood.
Okay. You can see on that board that we've got the 14th floor marked, and we've discussed a little bit about flat 113
Yes.
specifically, and you said that at some point in the night it became a focus. Do you have any broad estimate of the time at which that flat might have become a focus for those on the bridgehead?
I only remember it from when I was on the ground floor, and our inability to get to it, so it would have been later on. But that was my memory of that particular flat.
Thank you. And again, when the bridgehead was on the ground floor,
Yes.
and thinking about flat 113, were you aware at any point of a BA crew coming into the bridgehead with a slip of paper with FSG information on it for flat 113, whose brief was then changed to go and search a floor rather than go to a particular flat?
No.
It's not something you were aware of?
No, I'm afraid not.
One final question on specific flats, and if I could ask Paul to bring up those 2 exhibits from Louisa De Silvo's witness statement side by side again. So it's MET 000-15817 to the left, and then MET 15820 on the right. And looking at the right-hand photograph, you might be able to see sort of about 2/3 to the bottom that on the right-hand side of that photo is marked flat 142.
Where am I looking? Sorry.
So if you see, I think it might be just to the left of that wall. Does the number 142 trigger any recollection for you?
I'm afraid not, no.
Were you aware if any crews were briefed to go to 142?
Not from memory, no.
And finally, and this really is the final question, when you were based on the ground floor, you were obviously in a good position to see the sort of condition that returning firefighters were in when they were coming back from deployments. And you talk about it a little bit in your statement. I don't need to take you there. But one question has been asked is whether you can just describe what sort of condition they were in when you saw them. Were there specific symptoms that you picked up on?
We had guys that were being carried out by our own crews due to heat stress and total exhaustion. Obviously I wasn't up there, but the conditions were brutal, and the crews were being punished and pushing themselves beyond what any of our policies state they should go to. And we had firefighters collapsing, being administered oxygen right next to the entry control. At one point, the whole foyer was just covered in remnants of like emergency aid kits, helmets floating about from where we'd literally stripped firefighters and carried them off. It was really brutal.
Mr. Morrison, thank you. That's the last of my questions. So it just leaves me to thank you for coming along today to give evidence.
Yes, I'd add my thanks to that, Ms. Goulbourne and Mr. Morrison. It's very helpful to us to hear your account of what you did that evening, and we're very grateful to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Right, would you like to go to the usher then, please? Yes, Ms. Goulbourne.
So there will now be a change of witness and a change of counsel.
Right.
So it may be an appropriate moment to have another break.
Do we have a change of furniture too?
I believe not, actually, no.
Right. But it would be convenient, would it, for me to rise for a moment?
Probably for a moment,
Yes.
sir.
All right. Well,
Thank you
I'll
very
rise
much.
for as long as it is necessary, and
Thank
you can
you,
ask
sir.
the usher to come and get me when you're ready.
Thank you
All
very
right.
much, sir.
Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Mr. Chairman, I now call Group Manager Patrick Goulbourne.
Thank you.
Just have to see the Bible in my hand.
Thank you.
Repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence that I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Goulbourne. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Mr. Goulbourne, could we begin by your giving us your full name, please?
Sure, Patrick Wayne Goulbourne.
Right. And can I say, first of all, thank you very much to you for coming to the inquiry and assisting us with our investigations. We do appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
My questions, and I say this to all witnesses, my questions are intended to be short and simple. Often they're not. If you want me to repeat it or to put the question in a different way, I'm always very happy to do that. So please just indicate.
Okay.
And if you need a break at any stage, please just let me know and we can arrange one.
Okay.
Right. Can I please ask you to take your 2 witness statements, which are either in a blue file in front of you or we will look at on the screen, which is on the desk to your right, or on the big screens at the back if you want. Now, the first one is dated the 5th of July 2017, and its MET reference is MET 000-10759. The second one is dated the 22nd of February 2018, and its MET reference is 000-13111. Can I ask you, have you read both of those statements recently?
Yes, I have.
Right. And can you confirm for us that the contents are true?
Yes, I can.
Now, you also have 3 exhibits, which are sketches which were made by you, I think, and those are MET 000-15873, 15874 and 15875. There's no need to look at those now. We may do in due course. Haven't you discussed your statements or your evidence that you're going to give to us today with anybody before coming here?
No, I haven't.
No. Can I start, therefore, with the position you occupied in June 2017? At that time, were you a borough commander?
Yes, I was the borough commander of Tower Hamlets at the time.
In Tower Hamlets. And is that the same thing as a group manager?
Yes, it is.
Right. And that was your rank in June 2017. Is it your current role still?
No, I'm currently a Deputy Assistant Commissioner.
You're now a DAC?
Yes, I am.
Very good. And when were you made a DAC, as they call it?
1st of November last year.
Right. And in the summer of 2017, in your role as Borough Commander, did you have any other major engagements, as well as Grenfell Tower?
Yes, I had a really busy couple of weeks. I was one of the first commanders for the London Bridge terrorist attack. And then a few days later, I was a command officer at Grenfell. And then 5 days later, I was an on-scene commander at the Finsbury Park terrorist attack.
Right. So when you made these statements that I've just referred to, were you in the middle of assisting authorities on those events as well as Grenfell Tower?
Yes, I was.
Right. Can you explain to us in broad terms what responsibilities a group manager or borough commander has?
Yeah, so the responsibilities of all the staff in a borough, including the buildings, the property. So internally, you're responsible for the fire brigade in that area and also how it delivers its services, whether that be its response, whether it'll be its overall performance, and also it's proactive work. So it's community engagement, it's community safety. And then there's the external work, which is working with partners. So the borough commanders are an integral link, ensuring working with the local authority, working with the chief execs, working with the ambulance service, the police, the NHS, ensuring that the full weight of the fire service can support all activities, including things like youth engagement.
Right. And so, being borough commander at Tower Hamlets at the time, did you have responsibility for overseeing the delivery of training to frontline firefighters in your borough?
So part of the training, mostly about quality assurance of that training to ensure it's being delivered, certainly through what we call DAM up, the development and maintenance of operational professionalism. That's supported by a central training programme, which is not the direct responsibility of a borough commander, but that's delivered by our training and development department.
Right. And as part of that function, at that time, June 2017, were you responsible for overseeing any training on fire survival guidance?
Overseeing the training at stations, quality assuring it, yes. So we have 11 service standards that we work to, and a borough commander and a station manager can deliver service standard visits at stations. So it's a quality assurance of the training and the activity taken. So service standard 2 deals with operational matters. So I, as a borough commander, could go to any of my watches, whether planned or unplanned, to then quality assure the standard of training and what they're delivering. And
did you do that in relation specifically to the delivery of training on the subject of fire survival guidance calls?
In specific to delivery of fire survival calls, I say no. But in the terms of our overall operational response, which could include fire survival guidance, then yes.
Right. And what about high-rise firefighting?
Yes, absolutely.
Right. Now, you say in your witness statement, and can I take you to the first of those? It's page 3 of the first of the statements. That's the one that's dated the 5th of July 2017. Can I ask you to go to the third paragraph in that statement? And you say that, as a rule, you train for high-rise quite a lot on station. Now, it's a short sentence. What do you mean by on station?
So watch managers will look at what training needs their watches require. As the Borough Commander of Tower Hamlets, and previously, I'd only just gone to Tower Hamlets, I was previously, for the previous 3 years, the Borough Commander for Islington. So inner city stations with lots of high-rise buildings, you try and get those crews to train quite considerably. The brigade also did a package called Back to Basics, and the theme of Back to Basics, which was one of the training packages we did across the borough, has been high-rise firefighting as well. Mainly about on-arrival tactics, plans, and certainly how you would operate at the initial part of an operational incident at high-rise incidents.
Yes. In the year or so prior to the fire at Grenfell Tower, did any of the high-rise training that you oversaw the quality assurance in respect of cover the question specifically of ignition or fire spread on a facade of a high-rise building?
No.
Right. So would I be right in thinking, therefore, that you never saw, let alone delivered any quality assurance over any training, on a slideshow called the Tall Buildings Facade? Does that ring a bell with you?
No.
Right. Do you know anything about training programs covering the question of the ignition or the fire spread on a facade of a high-rise building prior to Grenfell Tower?
On the facade, no, but we have training on fire extension and fire spread in high-rise buildings.
Right. Do you, in the let's say the 2 years or so leading up to Grenfell, do you remember doing any quality assurance or overseeing any training specifically on the subject of how to go about doing a full or partial evacuation of a high-rise residential block?
Training, no. We planned for evacuating and rescue quite considerably, but in terms of utilising the building resources to do full and partial evacuations, we didn't train for that.
Right. Now, and just leading on from that, do I take it also that that means that you would also not oversee or the training for or deliver training for circumstances in which you would consider implementing an evacuation of a building which had a stay-put policy in place?
Certainly we would talk around the operational tactics. So if a decision an incident commander has to make at a high-rise is what to do with the people on the floor of the fire of origin. So there's a decision to make whether you evacuate the whole floor if the fire's in the flat, or you can actually keep people to stay put. So certainly those decisions are made.
Yes.
And to just put a bit of context around the training for evacuation, a lot of that depends on the facilities that a building has got to carry out evacuation, and many buildings just don't have the facility to carry out a full evacuation of a block.
Right. And to your knowledge, did deliver training or oversee training on, it's quite specific this, on the circumstances when you would expand the scope of evacuation beyond the immediate compartment of origin and surrounding compartments?
Not specifically, no.
Right. I'm going to turn now to your mobilisation and arrival at Grenfell. Now, on your first statement on page 1, at the foot of the page, you say, and this is 4 lines up from the bottom, pick it up mid-sentence, as at 1:45 a.m. on Wednesday, 14th of June, I received a page's message and call from the watch. Now, we have, just pausing there, a recorded mobilisation time for you as just a little before that, in fact, quite a bit before that, at 01:15:28. And my question is, would that sound more likely, 01:15:28?
Yes, there was some issues around my mobilisation that evening.
Right. Well, let's just dig into that a little bit. If I can ask you to be shown LFB, I'm going to use this one, LFB, and it's 6078. Right. Now, let me try a different reference, lest something I've said comes up on the screen, which it shouldn't. Let me try this one, which is LFB number 2. So 7 zeros and a 2. Now, this is the mobilisation spreadsheet that we have from the LFB, and it's tab 17 of the master documents bundle for those who have that. And it shows a recorded time for your call with control as, this is line 16, as 01:46:52. And that's time mobile, but time mobilised, if you look to the left of that, is 01:15:28. And it shows Group Manager Whitechapel, and F115 being the call sign, which I think is you.
Yeah.
So we can say, can we take it from this record that you were actually mobilised at 01:15:28?
Yes, I was.
Now, what were the problems around your mobilisation?
Okay, so I wasn't actually on duty that evening.
Right.
I'd performed a specific task the evening before,
Right.
where I was recalled to duty. I'm a National Interagency Liaison Officer, so I work quite closely with other agencies, and I was recalled to do some specific tasks. Because it crossed over between the hours of midnight, because I was placed on recall and I was recalled, they had to book me back on duty. After I finished those duties, I booked back off, and it seemed by accident I was not booked off.
Right.
So on the evening, I was not physically on duty that evening.
But you were, in practice, continually on duty.
Because I'm the Borough Commander for Tower Hamlets, my base location is Whitechapel. So even though I'd gone back to my call-out base, which is my home, because the system thought I was on duty, it showed me at Whitechapel, but I was actually off duty that evening.
Right. Can I ask you, at the time when you were mobilised at 1:15:28, according to this record, when had you last been to bed?
I was in bed when the pager went off.
Oh, you were? Right. Yeah. How much sleep had you had?
I got home quite late that evening because I've got a cadet unit. So even though I'd had a late night, I promised the cadets that I would go and see them. So I worked with the cadets and young people till about 8 o'clock. So I got home about 9:15 and went to bed probably about 11 o'clock.
Right. Now, you, going back to your statement, if I can just take you back to the bottom of page 1, you say, the control operator I spoke to sounded like she was distressed. My first question is, did you call the control room, having been paged?
No, so I didn't hear the pager. And there is a procedure that if a officer does not respond to a pager message, they get paged twice. And if they don't respond to the pager message, then control call them. Because it's a welfare, because you don't know if the officer's in trouble. So I actually responded to my mobile phone. It was the mobile phone that woke me up.
And that mobile, was that your brigade mobile?
Yes, it was.
And the control room would have that number, presumably,
Yes.
for you. And that explains the end of the sentence before the call from the watch. Now, looking at the conversation you had, you say she sounded like she was distressed. Do you know who you spoke to?
No, I don't.
Okay. And when you say she sounded like she was distressed, why was that?
We know the control staff personally, and they're amazing people. And so generally they're very calm and they are great at giving us pertinent information about the incident. The control operator that called, obviously I hadn't responded to a pager. They were obviously very, very busy and basically said, "Are you going?" And because I just woke up, I kind of said, "Going to what?" And then she started giving me details of the incident. We've got a 20 pump fire with multiple FSGs. I then said, I'm actually not on duty, but it was clear that she was so busy she didn't have time to debate. And actually, on hearing that, and I remember, I was really fortunate, I remember hearing some of the tapes to Lacanau and remembering some of the control operators during Lacanau having similar conversations, and I thought, I'm not going to waste her time. I must be still shown on duty. To be honest, I've never heard control operators that sound that distressed, and I thought we needed help, and there was no point to argue. I must go, so I went.
Can I just go off point for a moment and just ask you about what you just said about hearing the calls from Lacanau? Were you at Lacanau House?
No, I was a staff officer during Lacanau House. I was a staff officer to the Assistant Commissioner.
I see. You didn't attend the incident?
I didn't attend the incident, no.
So what role did you have in the incident?
So post the incident, I assisted the Assistant Commissioner with some of the investigation and document supporting staff, etc.
I see. And was it in that context that you listened to the control room calls?
I heard a few, yes.
You heard a few. Did you hear FSG calls?
No, I didn't hear FSG calls, no.
What kinds of calls did you listen to as part of that exercise?
Most of that was just admin calls between officers.
I follow.
Just to assist the Assistant Commissioner get the information about the investigation for officers' actions.
And did you have any input into the compiling or drafting of what turned into the Lacanau House report?
No, just assisting in gaining information and passing it on to the relevant, correct people.
Okay, going back to the bottom then of page 1 of your statement, you say that the control room officer told you, no, you're on duty, there's a 20 pump fire, multiple FSGs, Grenfell Tower. We can, just to put a time mark on this, we know that there was a make-up to 20 pumps at 01:29:46. That was the service request in response to what had come from the fire ground, make pumps 20 at 01:29. Does that help you time this call you had with the control room? Was it around that time or was it perhaps a little later than that?
I would have thought it was slightly later. I think the request for make pumps 20 would have triggered mobilisations, and because I hadn't responded to the pager message, I think there would have been some process that would have taken a little while, but it wouldn't have taken that long, maybe 5 or 10 minutes later.
Okay, I see. Now, you have in your statement that she said to you that there were multiple FSGs. Were those her words, or is that your description of what she said?
From what I can recall, I'm pretty sure that's what she said to me.
Right. Did you ask her about FSGs when she told you that?
No.
Okay. What did you take from that?
It's not so much taken from the information, because it was just the tone, and she was fairly distressed in her tone, and I'd like to say it's rare, but you just don't often hear. Control operators take difficult calls every single day. It takes a lot to get them flustered, and for me there was no point in adding to her stress. It sounded like they needed assistance, and I'm an officer and I was going to go, so I went.
Right. Now, you went, how soon after that discussion did you leave, do you think?
Fortunately I know my way around London pretty well, so my kit's already pretty much in the bag, ready to go, so I just got some clothes, got my uniform on, and I probably would have been out of the house in under 5 minutes. Right.
And now we've got your status 2 time, your mobilisation time, mobile to incident time, as 01:46:52, which is in the short incident log at page 13. If I can just ask you to look at that. 01:46:52, and you're the second entry down under officers, 115 Goulbourne Patrick. Shows you as assigned at 01:15:28 as we saw before, and then mobile at 1:46:52. My question is, does that sound about right for you?
Yes, it does.
Now, we don't have a recorded arrival time for you to the incident, so I'm going to try and work through with you to see where we get to. So you set off how long after booking status 2, do you think?
I was in my car travelling at status 2 onto an incident, so a few minutes.
So did you book status 2 before you left or after you left?
Oh no, book status 2 on the telephone, get changed, pick up your kit and then leave.
Right.
Generally, if you don't know your way, you spend a little bit of time looking at the geographia just to ensure that you know the route that you're about to take.
Right.
Especially as senior officers, we travel some distance, so you don't want to try and get going and then try and work your way. It's best to start to plot your route en route so you don't make any mistakes. I know my way around London pretty well. I used to be stationed at North Kensington. I knew Grenfell Tower, so I knew the route I was about to take.
Okay. And did you, when you say you booked over the telephone status 2, was that during the same conversation with the control room officer?
Yeah, yes, it was.
So we can time that conversation to that mobilisation. What communications equipment did you have with you in your car en route?
So a standard officer airwave radio, which allows me to monitor the main scheme radio channel, so I could hear the control operators calling up individual call signs, giving them information or receiving information, and I could also hear the control operator passing FSGs. I also had a personal fireground radio, which officers generally turn on as soon as you get in your car. It won't give you any information, but the closer you get to the incident, you'll be able to start to pick up the fireground radio traffic.
Interesting. How close do you have to be to start picking up the fireground radio traffic?
You probably need a radio engineer. I'm unsure, but probably just under a mile, I would say, depending on the geographia of the building. If it's clear line of sight, probably a little bit further.
Right.
I wouldn't want to mislead you on detail, but as you get closer, you will start to pick up radio traffic, and it's really useful because it gives you a feel of what you're about to go to.
Now, in your statement, and just picking up on something you said just a moment ago about hearing individual call signs and information coming in your statement, you say, in the first main paragraph on page 2, you say in the third line of that paragraph, the volume of calls was phenomenal. The controller was reeling off lists of calls from people who were trapped. You see that? Now, just before we look at some detail, are there any that stand out particularly in your memory?
In terms of FSG calls?
Yes.
No, what stands out for me was just the volume. I've never heard anything like it. The moment I turned my radio on, it was alive. And it was like that until I got to the incident. It was just call after call. I really couldn't tell you any detail. I was probably more listening out for incident messages from incident commanders, make-up messages, informative messages to tell me what was going on to the incident.
Had you, in your experience, ever heard that volume and intensity of fire survival guidance information over the radio en route to an incident?
I've never heard anything like it, ever.
What thoughts, or did you have any thoughts en route as to what kinds of strategy or tactics the incident commander at the scene should be adopting?
En route, no. I was just trying to get some situational awareness of what we were going to. Because I know Grenfell Tower and I know it's a high-rise, I heard a make-up. So when officer in charges are giving assistance messages, you think there must be something really significant going on. En route, I remember travelling up the Marylebone Road, and I think as I kind of turned past Madame Tussauds and started going towards the elevated section of the Westway, at that point I saw the building, and it was a complete shock. But I'd kind of professionally hoped it was either scaffolding. I was hoping it was a building under construction, and generally sometimes we see some quite spectacular fires like that, but it's scaffolding with netting, which gives you the fire extension. But the closer you got to the job, is the more you started seeing people out on the street, and just the whole scene coupled up. I knew that he was attending something that was quite extraordinary.
In your then 20 years experience with as a firefighter with the LFB, what was the maximum number of FSG calls you had experienced at a single incident?
An incident I'd been to,
Yes.
no more than 2. Obviously, most people know about Lacanau, and I think it went into 7, maybe a little bit more than that. But and I don't know if that's exactly right, but I can remember it was 7 or 8 or 9, maybe. But that was the highest. I've never heard the number of calls we were receiving that night.
And just if we can just get a picture from the contemporaneous evidence of the kinds of calls you might have been hearing, can I ask you please to go to page 19 of the short incident log, the SIL. Given that we've got you mobile to incident at 1:46:52, if we look at page 19 and look, we can start halfway down that page at 1:43:19, service request, RT4, people stuck in flats on 10th floor. Just cast your eye down the page and we can see that minute by minute, pretty much, there are RT4, which is radio transmission calls coming out of the control room. These are recorded on the vision system. Does this, just looking at the page, does this give us an impression of the calls you were hearing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So that when it says RT4, that's broadcast over the radio. Could you hear those calls?
Yes.
So you were tuned into RT4?
Yeah, so North Ken is on our radio channel, which is Flonops 4.
Flonops 4, yeah. Right. Were you able at that stage to form an impression as to whether the information being given in those radio messages was sufficiently detailed to be able to help the incident ground start to effect rescues?
Yeah, we've got a policy and a process for FSGs, and I had no doubt that they were probably processing those FSGs and getting that information off to the bridgehead as soon as possible and deploying crews. Right. Did you have any particular thoughts about it at the time as to whether the information that was being communicated was sufficiently detailed? No, I had no thoughts. I heard radio transmissions that were perfectly in tune with the details that you'd given FSG. It was just the volume that was very different. Right. I'm just taking, and this isn't really so much a question for you, but I just want to see if I can get a specific answer. Looking at the one at 1:43:19, which is a radio transmission, or rather a service request from PD, which is, I think, Pete Duddy in the control room. He says, people stuck in flats on 10th floor. We don't see any addresses there. Do you remember having any thoughts about whether the absence of an address, a flat number, was a problem? No, I didn't have any thoughts because I'm not even too sure at 1:43 I was mobile. If I was on scene and I received that information, knowing that there was people stuck on the 10th floor would have been more information than I would have had anyway, and it would have been very useful. Right. Now, and just going back to your journey, in your statement on page 2, you say, in the 4th paragraph, that you pulled into the Marylebone Road and you recall hearing Rocky Welsh take over as incident commander. Rocky, that's Richard Welsh. Yes, it is. That's his nickname, is it? Right. We have a time for that as 02:04, and just for the record, that's the short incident log at page 21. We can just see it if you like. Does that kind of time ring a bell with you? Yeah. 02:04? Right. And you say you also heard it called 40 pumps. I heard it called make pumps 40, you say. And you also say this was a major incident. My questions are, did you hear a calling of a major incident? Yes, I did, via the radio. Right. And where were you at that point when you heard it called a major incident? I was not far from scene. I didn't go up the West Way because I kind of knew my way around the back, so I was kind of travelling some side roads between where Alpha 21 Paddington is and where back to the scene of Grenfell. So I was in some back roads around there. around that area.
I see. Okay. So you still haven't yet arrived?
No, I hadn't arrived yet, but I was probably no more than 6 or 7 minutes out, if that.
Right. So we've got a time of the calling of the major incident at 02:06 48. We've got it in the short incident log at page 21. Given that that's the time of that, 6 or 7 minutes later would take you to about 2:14. Would that be about the time you arrived?
Yeah, I think that's approximately about right, yes.
Right, okay. I know it's difficult to be exact, but we're just trying to pin it down.
Yeah, I tried to book in via the RT. I was going to book in via the RT, but there was so much radio traffic. And actually, myself booking status 3 was probably the least important bit of information that would have been on that radio, so I left it alone and booked on in the command unit, ensuring that they could do their FSGs and speak to fire engines that were mobile.
Right. Now, in your statement on page 2, in the paragraph third from bottom, and it's difficult to navigate one's way around the paragraph numbers, but it starts straight away. I had my business head on, and this is en route, so we hadn't yet arrived. The fire was from bottom to top with vertical and lateral spread. I remember thinking, is it the fascia? Is it scaffolding? Is it netting? I then saw that this was not a building under construction. Does that mean that you discounted in your mind the possibility of a scaffolding or netting related fire?
Yes, when I didn't see any and it wasn't a building under construction,
Right.
then yes.
So having worked out that it wasn't a building under construction, what did you think was alight?
I was unsure.
Did you consider the possibility, well, let me ask it this way. Had you heard of cladding fires in the past at that time?
Yes, we've watched, as officers, you try and kind of investigate and see what happens around the world. There was a fire in, I think it was Dubai, that's been quite famous. So senior officers work on rota groups, so you kind of talk through tactical plans and things that you see. So we've talked about lateral fire spread and tactics that we'd use, so
Right.
yes.
What sort of tactics would you use, would have come out of those senior officer discussions about lateral fire spread?
Well, a lot of it would be about resources, because some of your tactical decisions would be what are the priorities for you and what resources you would need. You would work to policy, so we've got a high-rise policy. We would work to that, but it would be, what sort of resources and how you would plan to tackle a fire that was actually travelling that far. I remember some of those discussions because certainly there was one in France where it moved from balcony to balcony, but it went vertically, but it never travelled laterally. It had never breached the compartmentation, so you still had a difficult fire. But we hadn't really talked about what happens when it starts breaching each compartment up, because if I'm perfectly honest, that was something I don't think I've ever seen, and I didn't expect to see.
These discussions you're talking about, who were they with?
So senior officers working on a rota group, we work together, so we often meet, certainly when we're on duty for weekends, and we'll sit and we'll talk not only about incidents that we've gone to together and probably debrief them, but sometimes we do things called tactical decision-making exercises just to run through command for ourselves, just as refreshers.
Right. These rota groups, who would be on them normally?
So every shift, every day in London, and the London Fire Brigades, senior officers at station manager, group manager level, they sit on particular rota groups.
Right.
So at that time I was an officer on North Rota 2. So North Rota 2 has a number of officers that it needs to be on shift per day, a number of station managers, a number of group managers. So you're the same group that follow this kind of same shift pattern, almost like a watch does.
These discussions, would they be noted down? So would there be a written record of these discussions?
No, they're generally informal, generally us getting together as professional officers and just talking about operational tactics.
Right. And can you give us a flavour of what kind, even if in short terms, what kind of strategies, tactics you would adopt when faced with a fire on the exterior, such as Dubai or France?
Well, part of that will be about what external firefighting you can do, what resources you'd need, what internal firefighting or what actual building construction, what fixed installations could help you. Certainly I think in the Dubai they had sprinklers, so it stopped the lateral fire spread. So we talked about the management of that, what that looks like. So a kind of a range of tactics you would talk about, and some of a range of challenges that you may face. You know, a large incident, sometimes you need to just consider about sighting of appliances and movement of people.
And were these discussions that you were having, although they were informal, as you say, did they lead anywhere? Did they lead into any specific consideration of training or ensuring that frontline firefighters were aware of the things that had to be considered?
No, I mean, officers have their regular, what we call incident command training, where we go to, which is centrally-led training, and there's a whole incident command process that does that anyway. So when you take a command role, and certainly an incident command role, you're subject to the PRC process, that's the performance review of operations, or the performance review of command, where there's an independent chair. They will review all of your command decisions at an incident. You'll be awarded development points or be awarded positive points depending on your performance that will get placed onto your individual training records, which will then decide whether you get development or notable performance. And also your performance is monitored by a monitoring officer. So whenever you're an incident commander, there's always an officer at one rank above you that's monitoring your performance. And also the operational review team who monitor organisational performance. So when I talk about our tactical decision-making exercises, they're kind of informal between us, but they just supplement some of the things that we learn through the formal process anyway.
What I'm really trying to get a feel for is how widespread intelligence or discussion about external fire spread through cladding, such as the Dubai experience, was in the London Fire Brigade prior to Grenfell. Was it limited to these senior groups' informal discussions, or was it more widespread, with an attempt to push the experience, as it were, downstream into the operational line?
And that's really hard for me to say. I know what we used to talk about, and officers discuss incidents all of the time. We attend incidents as rota groups together and share information, but that's kind of in addition to the formal process that I've just described.
Coming back to the facts of the night, then, when you saw the fire on the exterior and discounted netting or cladding or scaffolding, did you think back to Dubai?
If I'm honest, no. I just wanted to get to the command unit because I felt they needed more people and they needed assistance. And if I was in their position, I would have expected every single officer to get there as soon as possible.
Did you have any thoughts at the time about whether this was a fire, or could you see whether this was a fire only on the outside, or could you see whether it had penetrated into some of the flats by that stage?
No, I'd seen that there was some natural fire spread into some of the flats, but again, I didn't know whether it had actually breached all of the compartmentation. You generally get, I've been a firefighter in central London stations for most of my career. You will pick up high-rise fires from experience. Some will spread outside and go through windows. And it looked like someone had gone vertically, then up through some windows, but at that point I didn't know whether it had breached the compartmentation and into the communal areas.
Right, okay. Did you have any thoughts at that stage, when you saw the fire first, about whether there should be full or partial evacuation of the building?
No, I wouldn't have thought that. Grenfell Tower, in terms of building construction, for me, I knew the tower. It was a classic 1970s block of flats. It's concrete floors, concrete ceilings, fire doors, partitions. You generally don't get fire spread in buildings like that, so I would not have expected it at all.
When you say you knew the tower, did you know that it had been the subject of a large refurbishment in 2016?
No, so I was stationed at North Kensington between 1997 and I think 2000. I'd been to Grenfell Tower for a range of incidents, whether they be shutting lifts, floodings, some fires, some bin chute fires. And it was a 1970s block of flats with no cladding when I saw it. No. I then transferred to Tottenham and I didn't go back to Grenfell Tower.
So the answer is you didn't know about the refurbishment?
No.
Now, moving on, if I can take you then to page 2 of your statement and look at the second last paragraph, which starts, I went to the command unit. You say that you went to the command unit and Dave O'Neill was being briefed by Andy Loughlin. Is that Andy O'Loughlin?
Yes.
Who was the incident commander. and at the foot of the page you say that I would say that from my turning up and getting to the command unit was less than 5 minutes. So if you've got you coming at about, arriving at just before 2:15 or so, would it be right then that you tell me, you get to the command unit about 2:20 or so?
Yes.
Did you hear Andy O'Loughlin, or did you hear any message broadcast over Flanops 4 or on the fireground radio that Andy O'Loughlin had been made IC?
I really can't remember hearing it, no.
Okay. How did you come to know that he was IC, incident commander?
I spoke to him in the command unit, and he was standing there, and I asked him, I said, "You've taken over from Richard Welsh," and my words would have been, "Have you taken over from Rocky?" And he said, "Yeah, I'm IC."
Right.
And it's not discounting that he probably did send that message. I just didn't hear it. I may have been out of my car at that time and walking, because I had some distance to walk from where I parked.
Yes. And to be clear, was this command unit? Well, where was this command unit?
I really can't remember. I remember asking some firefighters, "Where's the command unit?" and then pointing me in the right direction. And I walked down a couple of streets, but I couldn't tell you where I was.
Right. You don't know whether it was on Bowmore Road or on Grenfell Road?
I'm really sorry, no.
Okay. Well, when you arrived, was it handling fire survival guidance messages?
No.
It wasn't. Now, again, just a time marker. We have an arrival time for Dave O'Neill of 02:12. And just for our reference, that's the mobilisation spreadsheet at line 44. So we have that on the transcript. So your arrival at the command unit would be, as I think we've established, a little bit after that. Do you remember DAC O'Loughlin sending a message at 2:16 to make FRUs 10?
No, I didn't hear that message.
You didn't. Now, you describe, as we've just seen in your statement, on page 2, second paragraph from bottom, going to the command unit and hearing the briefing. And you say in your statement that sector safety had been given to Dave, if you see that, and then you say, "I asked who was doing the search sector and fire sector and was told that Rocky," that's Richard Welch, "had both fire and search." Can you explain, first of all, what sector safety means? What is that?
So when we split a fire ground or an incident ground into operational spans of control, we also will put not only a commander, maybe a sector commander in place, but we'll put a safety officer in place to work with the sector commander to control safety within a specific area. What we generally will do then is put an overarching senior sector safety to ensure the coordination of all of the safety officers in each sector. So when pertinent information that may be found, that may be central, that can get disseminated via sector safety, and they will coordinate that on behalf, generally, of an incident commander.
And fire sector, can you explain what that is?
So the fire sector commander is the person who, when the incident, certainly at a high rise, is sectorised. So where the fire is, it's generally the floor above and the floor below the fire. But that's depending on the geography of the building. You know, I know North Kensington very well, and we've got a multitude of different types of blocks of flats. Tredick Tower, which is on North Kent ground, is very different. One balcony feeds 3 different floors. You can get a flat going up, a floor in the middle, and a flat going down off the same floors. You wouldn't be able to do 1 floor above, 1 floor below with that type of building construction. So, as a general rule, the fire sector commander will sit at the bridgehead, but will have the operational control of the fire sector, which is generally 1 floor below and 1 floor above the fire, depending on the geography of the building.
And search sector?
So the search sector will be the floors above the fire sector.
Right.
So if we're getting fire extension, that's someone to control the operations above the fire.
Following on from that, when you arrived at the command unit, to your knowledge, had command been split into spans of control, into those 3 areas, or did that happen after you arrived, or while you were arriving?
I couldn't really say whether I would have expected they would have been split. It's not unusual that as incidents progress in size, then you increase the rank of the officer that is being a sector commander.
Did you get the impression, though, when you arrived, that those spans of control had already been created?
I gave it I hadn't really heard, because you don't pick up the fireground radio traffic until you're about a mile away.
Right.
So I wouldn't have known who was being detailed, Dave was being detailed to take over from. So I really couldn't answer that. But certainly when I asked Andy, I keep saying Rocky, sorry, I have to apologise. Richard was the fire sector commander as GM, so I offered myself as search sector, as a group manager, to take an important role in the incident.
Well, I wonder if that's quite right. In your statement, you say you asked who was doing the search sector and fire sector, and was told that Rocky had both fire sector and search. First of all, who told you that?
Andy O'Loughlin.
Right. And it looks as if, in fact, he had been given both sectors. Is that right? Or had he only been given fire?
It was the way it was said. He was managing the bridgehead at the moment, so I think at that point Andy was changing the sectorisation. So, because as officers come, it allows you those officers available to be able to deliver those tasks, and I was one of those officers. Yes.
Now he hadn't been there for very long, as we know. But did you get the impression from that Rocky had actually been given both fire and search?
No, because the fire was so extensive, I think Rocky was given fire because, unfortunately, most of it was on fire.
Well, absolutely. But what about search? Was that separate or given to somebody else at that stage? Or
no, I didn't take over search sector from anybody.
I see. So who was running search sector?
So technically, because the fire was from the top to the bottom, it was all fire. So generally, there's no fire in the search sector. The search sector is there for smoke spread and searching and generally casualty reassurance. But because by the time I turned up, there was certainly fire from around the fourth to the top. It would have been hard to kind of delineate a search sector.
When you came into the command unit and had this discussion with DAC O'Loughlin, where was Richard Welsh at that stage? Do you remember?
No.
He wasn't on the CU.
He wasn't on the CU.
Right. Now, you say in the same paragraph, in the last line, because I knew the ground and know the crews, I wanted to be in there, so I got myself put in with Rocky. Does that mean that it was your suggestion to take up a role on the bridgehead?
Yeah, I offered it to Andy. I wanted to help like any officer would, so I offered it up.
What did you say to him?
I said, I'll go and support Rocky. Richard.
You can call him Rocky, it's fine.
I said, there's a lot going on, the fire's extended. And he said, that's fine. And I said, we'll put fire and search. We talked about putting fire and search together because it was quite complex.
Yeah. So you actually suggested your role to DAC O'Loughlin rather than him telling you what he wanted you to do?
No, it was a kind of discussion. He talked about roles that were available, and I was quite keen to try and assist and say, I'm more than happy to go and help that.
Did you, in this discussion with DAC O'Loughlin, discuss the nature of the fire spread?
No.
You didn't? Did he brief you, or did he brief anybody about the fire being on the outside of the building only?
So I overheard some of his brief to Dave O'Neill talking about fire spread and talking about safety outside, but like most commanders, you don't interfere in a briefing because he's delivering important information to Dave O'Neill.
Right. Did you know which floors BA wearers were being committed to at that point?
No.
Did you know whether there'd been any discussion about committing EDBA wearers at that point?
I saw EDBA wearers on the ground, and I knew they were committing, but at that point I wouldn't have expected to get that information. I got the information from DAC O'Loughlin that Richard was in charge of the bridgehead, and also that the bridgehead was on the third floor.
Right. Did you have any? Did you know anything, or did you learn anything from DAC O'Loughlin about what fire survival guidance information was coming in and being coordinated?
No, I'd heard the FSGs obviously en route,
yes.
And I knew there was a separate command unit delivering the FSG information, so I didn't have a discussion with DAC O'Loughlin.
Okay. And did you have any discussion with him about the calls that you'd heard being reeled off by the control room as you'd heard en route?
No.
Right. Moving then on to your going to the tower, which is the next topic. Can I just ask you, are you all right to continue, or do you need a break?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
All right. Now, you then make your way to the tower, and on the foot of page 2, you say you recall passing a pump and the Paddington turntable ladder and a group of firefighters under the Westway waiting to go in. Just to be clear, when you say Westway, do you mean the Westway there?
Well, it was the elevated section of the roadway above.
Right. Do you remember whether that was... Well, which side of the building was that in relation to the entrance?
So the main entrance, and the way the Westway kind of faced it, and the firefighters were underneath there waiting to go in,
Right.
waiting to be called in.
I think most people call the elevator section the walkway rather
The walkway,
than the Westway.
yeah.
The Westway is actually the A40.
Yes.
Yeah. So just so we're getting the terminology.
Okay.
All right. But do you remember how long that was when you got to the tower after arriving first at the command unit?
Andy briefed Dave first. That would have probably took a minute or so. He briefed me afterwards, and then I made my way from the command unit. So I would be about 2 or 3 minutes, maybe a little bit longer, but I would have thought it would be under 5 minutes.
Right. I should have asked you before I asked that question how long your briefing with DSE O'Loughlin took. But you say, I think you say 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah, there was so much going on. It wasn't the long briefings. It was to the point, salient points, and try and get in to get to work.
No. Now, can you give us an impression at the time you arrived at the entrance to the tower, how many firefighters were waiting outside the tower? We know that there was a group waiting outside the tower at that stage. How big was that, would you say?
Really hard to estimate. 20 or 30, a fair amount of BA wearers were waiting to go in.
Could you see how the BA wearers were being marshalled at that stage?
Yeah, there was a watch manager there. Watch manager had comms, and it seemed that there was a system that when it was almost being used as like a staging area. So when the bridgehead or whoever was upstairs, I didn't really know at that time, wanted crews, it seems like they would just radio down a number and then they would spot them and walk in.
Did you know that a station manager had been tasked to oversee that group of firefighters as part of a BA main control exercise?
Not at that point, no.
Did you come to know that later?
Yes.
Yes. When was that? When did you think you came to know that? Roughly.
I really wouldn't want to guess.
No.
So I knew that we had that system in place, and certainly when the bridgehead was relocated to the ground floor, we had a process that was supported by Nick Myatt, where I asked Nick Myatt to get me a number of EDBA wearers ready,
yes,
a number of SDBAs ready. We'd kind of split them so we could give them briefings. I always wanted a pool of 20 EDBA and 15 SDBA ready, and he must not let that deplenish. So as we were moving and using BA crews, he was working, I think, with Andy Walton to ensure that the people outside in the staging area then supplemented the people in the holding area downstairs on the ground floor. But that was a little bit later after relocating.
At the point when you entered the tower, could you gain any impression of how many EDBA wearers there were available there?
No, there were EDBA, but I couldn't tell you how many at that point.
Okay. Could you see them?
Yes.
How many could you see, do you think?
I definitely saw a crew, and generally those riding fire rescue units will go together, so it was either a crew of 4 or 5.
Right. And were they in the queue with everybody else, or was there a separate queue for EDB?
Oh, no, they were in the queue with everyone else.
I see.
Because it was because access was difficult, the access was controlled by the watch manager because you had to be spotted to get in, or else something might have fell on your head.
Right. Okay, we'll come to look at this in a bit more detail in a moment. Taking you to your statement, page 3, 4th line down, you say the lobby itself was pretty quiet. There were firefighters and kit there, I continued walking up, and as I did so, people were walking down, their eyes streaming, fully blackened faces, screaming, crying. Now, and you then go on to say a few lines down, in this instance, the bridgehead was situated on the 3rd floor. Again, just trying to get a precise time on this, I think we can. Can I ask you to be shown, first of all, please, INQ 322? Now, this is a photograph taken from camera 4 of Grenfell Tower's CCTV. There were a number of cameras on the ground floor. We'll be looking at some of these pictures in the course of your evidence. This is the first one, and this is camera 4 with an adjusted time mark of 02:28:12. Can you identify yourself in that picture?
Yes, I'm standing in the doorway.
Now, thank you. Now, if we pan back out again, you will see that on the right in the photograph, but on the left as you come in, group manager's left, if you see what I mean, there are 2 firefighters doing something on the wall. Did you notice what they were doing when you came in?
No.
Did you notice anybody there at all?
No.
It didn't go on your radar?
No.
Okay. Now, the next picture is INQ quintuple 0323. If we can just quickly look at that. This is an adjusted. This is camera 2, which is at the foot of the stairs, behind the glass partition, with an adjusted time mark of 02:28:20. So this is 8 seconds after you first entered the tower. We see you going upstairs. Where were you going? Where were you headed?
To the bridgehead to meet Richard Welsh.
Right. And on page 3, going back to your statement, if you go to it, in the first main paragraph on that page, which starts, the lobby covers the ground floor, you say, and I could probably take this quickly, that the FSG, you say, as you enter that door, the FSG was set up to the left. And then you go on to describe the rest of the lobby. When you say in your statement, the FSG was set up to the left, going back to my question, is that something you learnt later after you did this statement, or is it something you actually recall from the night?
Have you spotted the passage, Mr. Goulbourne?
No, sorry.
I'm so sorry.
Well, that makes 2 of us then.
Well, I'm so sorry. I'm going a bit. I'm going a bit too.
No, I'm just wondering whether we're on the right page.
It's my fault. In fact, I've given the wrong reference. But it's page 4. I'm so sorry.
You might do
Not
better.
page 3. Mr. Chairman, thank you. That paragraph starts, the lobby covers the ground floor and is set up as follows. And then it says, there is a door leading into the block that faces the west way, towards the west way. As you enter that door, the FSG was set up on the left. My question is that something you remember from the night independently, or is that something you learnt after you did your statement?
So I remember that, but that was later on in the evening. So when I first went to the bridgehead, FSGs were being handled upstairs. Later on that evening, when we relocated the bridgehead, where those firefighters were in that picture, that's where the FSGs were being taken.
I follow. I follow. And to get back to what you said before, when you first went into the tower, you didn't notice them there?
No.
Right. Then that's clarified that. Then coming back to page 3, and this time I mean page 3, the second paragraph goes on to say, just 3 lines up from the end of it, in this instance the bridgehead was situated on the 3rd floor. Do you remember how you knew that the bridgehead was on the 3rd floor?
Yes, Andy O'Loughlin, when I got my brief, told me the bridgehead was on the 3rd floor, and then I made my way into the tower, and went straight to the bridgehead and found it on the 3rd floor.
And who was in charge of the bridgehead when you arrived there?
Richard Welsh.
Anybody else?
Nick Might was there, Gareth Cook was there, but I was unsure what their roles were, but they were performing some roles on behalf of Richard Welsh. I remember seeing Louisa De Silva and Brian O'Keefe, and they were around the BA board. There was a comms operator,
Who was
Michael.
that?
Name's gone, sorry. Yeah, that's who I remember on the bridgehead at that time. The bridgehead was unbelievably busy, and there was lots and lots of firefighters and lots of. I used to be on the Red Watch, so I know lots of those firefighters. So,
Right.
so I saw lots of faces I knew, but there was lots of people there. BA crew, some in BA, some not. People passing kit and equipment, etc.
As a matter of general impression, did you get a sense that there was order, or was it chaotic?
There was order in terms of Richard Welsh was desperately trying to deploy crews, but there was so much to do. The geography of the building weren't great for a bridgehead, but that's what we had to work with. So when I got there, it was very, very busy. But you imagine there was BA crews coming in, BA crews coming out, information coming in, casualties coming in various states past the bridgehead. It was a difficult scene, but Richard was really clear that he was definitely trying to pump BA crews upstairs, and there were FSG calls being taken, crews being deployed.
Right, just breaking that down then. First of all, did you see how individual BA crews were being given their deployment instructions?
No, Richard Welsh was briefing and crews were going.
Right. Now, we've had quite a bit of evidence before today that there was a system at that stage whereby, to summarise it, FSG information was coming into the lobby, recorded on the wall after 2:15, and then a watch manager Watson, was essentially writing them down and then giving written instructions on chits of paper to individual BA crews. Did you see that in operation yourself at that time?
Not at that time, but that process was done later on when we relocated the bridgehead.
Okay.
So when the bridgehead was relocated downstairs, we split in, certain areas into individual tasks.
Okay, we'll come to that. But when you first arrived at the bridgehead on the 3rd floor, did you see the process by which Richard Welsh was giving deployment instructions to BA wearers?
No, Richard, and I'm pretty sure he said that FSGs are coming in and they were being taken, I think, by Louisa De Silva. But I may be wrong. There was someone around the BA board that was taking FSG calls, and Richard Welsh was deploying crews.
When you say taking FSG calls, you mean actually receiving them from outside the tower or somewhere else in the tower?
Because I just got to the bridgehead, I really won't know where they were coming from, but at the bridgehead they were receiving information and deploying crews.
Did you see how the information was arriving?
No.
Did you notice whether it was on a piece of paper, or by radio?
No, sorry.
Okay. Do you recall seeing anybody recording FSG information at the bridgehead when it was on the 3rd floor, when you first arrived there?
I think at an early stage I saw a fib board in use, but whether the fib board was any good because of the volume of information, I don't know. I was, at that point, because I'd come on as a second commander, I was focusing on meeting with Richard through the crowd to get a brief, and then we could start to split and understand what each other's task would be.
Yes. And the fib board, did that have can you give us an impression of what you saw, to the best of your memory, on the fib board?
No, because at that point I'd just been introduced to the incident. I didn't have a command role, so I wouldn't have interfered because I would have been interfering in something that was ongoing. My primary focus was to get a brief off of Richard, and once I received that brief, then I would have been clear on what my role was going to be going forward.
Yes. Now, did you notice any fire survival guidance calls being recorded on the wall of the bridgehead while it was on the 3rd floor?
I don't recollect information going on the wall, no.
Now, let's see if I can prompt a recollection. If I I ask you to go to give me a moment. MET 000-15596. This is one of a number of photographs which are all quite similar. And this was taken at around about 0308, as the bridgehead moved down from the third floor to the ground floor. And it's we've had evidence before that it's FSG information which had been inscribed on the wall by Louisa de Silvo. Do you remember seeing that?
No, but I remember a discussion around ensuring that the information of FSGs was transferred when we relocated the bridgehead.
Right. How much time did you actually spend at the bridgehead on the, well, it was on the third floor?
I'm sorry, I'd probably only roughly estimate, but I would have thought it was probably 30 minutes,
Right.
35, 40 minutes max.
And during that time, is this right, you never noticed any officer inscribing fire survival guidance on the wall?
Well, in the time of getting to Richard, I got my brief around how we were going to operate together. And it was, I think there were a couple of things that we needed in terms of organising some firefighting jets, etc., which I resolved on his behalf. I remember it was quite early, we had a conversation that the bridgehead was compromised and we should move it down. And the conversation then was about ensuring that all of the information was required moved down to the bridgehead. And I remember we had a conversation around there were still BA crews being deployed, and we both didn't want to leave BA crews upstairs on their own, knowing that they were coming down in quite difficult states, the BA crews with casualties, and suddenly they come back to an empty bridgehead. So we were having a conversation about who was going to stay. One of us had to relocate the bridgehead down. I remember, I'm pretty sure it was Rocky went downstairs and ensured that crews were being deployed. And I stayed with Gareth Cook for a short time, because as we were relocating the bridgehead, an FSG call came through for a flat on the third floor.
Yes.
So we decided to break the door down and search that flat and then wait for the firefighters to come down. So I remember shouting to the firefighters to come back because we're relocating the bridgehead.
Right. You say in that answer, I think, the answer before actually, that you were at the bridgehead while it was on the third floor for probably 30 minutes, 35, 40 minutes max. Were you there continuously during that period, or did you come and go?
No, I think I popped downstairs for something. I can't remember what it was. Whether I assisted a casualty, I did something, so I wasn't continuously at the bridgehead.
Where were you standing for most of the time in relation to the entry control boards when the bridgehead was on the third floor? Do you remember?
So at the onset, I was nearer to the stairwell. The entry control was further in where Richard was, and there were quite a number of BA crews in there. I allowed for some activity before I kind of forced my way through to Richard.
I see. So could you actually see the entry control boards being used?
Yes.
You could. You could see the information going on them, could
yes. And I certainly overheard talks of FSG. That information was definitely there because it's there, but I really can't remember recalling physically seeing it myself.
Now, going back to your statement, page 3 of your statement, at about a quarter of the way down the page, the paragraph starts, "In the bridgehead is the BA board." You see that? This shows which crews are deployed with breathing equipment, where they are, how long they've been deployed, and so on. I could see from the board that we had BA crews committed to the third and fourth floors. Now, is it right? The BA board is the entry control board, is it?
Yes.
Right. And you say, I could see from the board that we have BA crews committed to the 3rd and 4th floors. Does the entry control board identify which floors crews were committed to?
So the entry control officer, once the BA crew get their brief, will annotate the board, not only used to be about the time of whistle, etc., how much air they've got, but would also detail where they're going.
Right. How much detail did you observe on the entry control boards per crew?
Just general that I can remember, floor they were going to. I certainly saw some initials about right-hand search, left-hand search, but it would be written in kind of an acronym, and comms channel, comms.
Right. Did you see any details about particular flat numbers being recorded on the entry control board?
I can't remember, but I do remember the conversations in the briefings that people were talking about FSGs and floors.
Do you remember seeing any details about numbers of persons trapped in each flat, or any flat?
Not at that point, but certainly when we relocated the bridgehead downstairs, there was really clear information coming of what flats and what floors they were on. There was a number of flats, I think it's probably in people's statements, certainly there was a flat on the 16th floor and a flat on the 18th floor that I was desperate to get to, because with the information we got from the FSGs, were that there were a number of residents that had gone into one flat, and we knew they were a priority.
And we'll come to that. Just focusing for the moment though on what detail was being recorded on the ECA boards, entry control officer boards, while it was on the 3rd floor. I think the answer, can I just press that again? Was there any detail of numbers of people in the flats and particular flat numbers, or was it just floors?
I mean, my look of the BA board was really cursory. Right. Just a quick glance, our crews committed, a few bits of pertinent information, and then I was off briefing and doing other jobs.
Yes, I see. Did you gain any impression during the 30 to 40 minutes you said you were at the bridgehead while it was on the 3rd floor, about numbers of EDBA wearers being committed?
No.
Right. Did you don't know, you can't help us with whether there was an increasing number of EDBA wearers at that stage, or whether there were none or lots? Can you help us with that?
No, I don't recall at that point the EDBA wearers on the board.
Right. Now, in your statement, you go on to say, I spoke to Rocky. This is immediately after what I've just shown you. This is a third of the way down page 3, just to get back there. I spoke to Rocky, who had been to see what was going on. His eyes were streaming from the smoke. Just pausing there. Was there smoke at the bridgehead, or was that smoke somewhere else in the building?
So when we relocated the bridgehead, that was because the bridgehead was compromised because of smoke. Right. Whether his eyes were streaming, I really don't know. Right,
the eyes streaming from smoke. He'd been to see what was going on. Do you know how far he got up the building?
No, but I know Richard a while, and as a good officer, you'd always want to try and have a look to see exactly what it is you're committing your crews to. So I would have thought he would have took a cursory look.
Right. Did he tell you how far up he'd got?
No.
Did he give you any kind of impression of what sort of conditions he'd seen on his visit up the tower?
Yes.
What?
Terrible.
Terrible in what sense?
It was just difficult. He said, I remember him talking about the smoke condition is pretty heavy, and the conditions are pretty poor.
Right. You go on to say, he told me there were what we call snatch rescues taking place on some of the upper floors, with crews making their way down with people. Some had got up as far as the 20th floor, but were unable to connect hoses to the outlet risers due to the fire. Was any of that information apparent from the BA board? Or BA boards?
Not that I can recall. That's not saying it wasn't there.
Right.
Like I said, my look at the BA board was quite cursory at that time.
I see. Okay. And when you say snatch rescues, are you referring to rescues carried out when firefighters are deployed to respond to particular fire survival guidance calls, or something else?
At the early parts of incidents, firefighters sometimes in BA or without BA can be deployed just to push to see how far they can get, to make as much effect they can get in the quickest time possible. And sometimes they're just what we call as snatch rescues. Generally, policies that we should have a bridgehead 2 floors below the fire and deploy BA crews. Sometimes in urgencies, crews do try and do snatch rescues.
And when you say some had got up as far as the 20th floor but were unable to connect hoses to the outlet risers due to the fire, number of things. First of all, is that something that Richard Welch told you? I mean, that's your recalling his telling you that, is it?
I really can't recollect. We must have talked about where we can set into a riser.
Right. Do you remember being told anything about whether BA wearers going to the 20th floor was a single occasion or on repeated occasions?
No. We talked about what crews were committed, and at that point some crews had already done those snatch rescues. People had been brought down, from my understanding. And now the fire that was obviously a little bit earlier, and right. Now where the fire had taken hold, crews were now going into compartments on what I thought was the 4th and 5th floor.
Right. Was at that stage, was it still the idea that BA crews would be committed to the 20th floor in order to fight the fire?
No. At that point, Richard had got some crews committed. We were talking about what the conditions were and how difficult they were. He also mentioned about the difficulty. We've got multiple FSGs. What it seemed like was that when the fire was so severe that when the crews had to, I probably need to put some context behind it. So the geography of the building was really difficult because, favourably as a firefighter, you'd want a dry riser outlet somewhere near the stairwell, somewhere in a protected lobby. That would make your life far easier. Unfortunately, the dry riser outlet was in the lobby at the furthest point away from the door. That meant that any lobby that was compromised by fire meant that we couldn't set in unless you put that fire out, and then that's time consuming. So I remember a conversation about the crews had to find a floor where they could get to the riser, then to set in, which means you had to run the hose up the stairs, and then once you went into a compartment, you are then going into a compartment that's involved. But unfortunately, those elements of combustion that have breached the fire separation are going to end up in the stairwell, and that's what seems what happened, is where you had such a severe fire. When BA crews, the first, or I can't say the first, but those BA crews at that point had gone in. It seemed that the smoke had gone into the stairwell, and the bridgehead on the 3rd floor got compromised.
Just continuing on the theme of the bridgehead on the 3rd floor being compromised, as you've just mentioned, when you first arrived at the 3rd floor bridgehead, was the air clear there or was it smoky?
It wasn't clear, but it was enough. It was enough for us to do work. We were. It was at a point where we would just work through it.
Okay. And before you moved down, what were the conditions like at that
They just
stage?
worsened pretty quickly.
Right. And where was the smoke coming from that made it worsen on the 3rd floor? Do you remember?
Well, I know BA crews were committed, so generally you would think that it was where we had to commit a crew into some upper floors where fire was in that lobby, and then it would have made itself into the stairwell and probably pushed its way down. But I couldn't confirm that. But
No.
Crews were committed, and the bridgehead was compromised, so we had no choice but to move it.
Right. So this was smoke coming onto the 3rd floor, into the lobby from downwards through the stairwell. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Right. Had you ever come across that before, that phenomenon?
Yes.
Right.
Not so long ago, I went to a 12-pump fire at Dorrington Point, Bow. Much the same. Bridgehead got compromised. Bridgehead was on the 5th. It's unusual, but it does occur, and there are occasions where we have to move bridgeheads. It's not ideal. Preferably we get a bridgehead set and we're able to do firefighting and search and rescue operations. But every now and again, geographies of buildings, the way fire spreads, we have to move bridgeheads. Unfortunately, this night we had to.
Yes. Do you remember whether there were firefighters being sent up without any firefighting media at all? While the bridgehead was on the third floor?
During the time I was at the third floor, no. But I know at certain points during the evening, I sent firefighters up without firefighter media.
Right. Now, later on in your statement, and this was when the bridgehead was on the ground floor, you say, and it's page 5 of your statement, if I can just show you the fourth paragraph there, page 5. You say that we were still using the outlet risers on floors 3 and 4. Just to pick it up. So we used extension hoses to allow the fire to be fought higher up. This allowed the hoses up as far as floor 7 and 8. This meant that everything was protected up to the 6th floor, but I wanted to get another extended jet. And you go on to say you couldn't achieve that. At what sort of time what was that you were still using outlet risers on the 3rd and 4th floor and then extension hoses? Well, that was clearly once you got down to the ground floor, but how long after that? Do you remember?
No, sorry, I really couldn't guess. I know that it was an issue that we tried to resolve a number of ways. And that's when we were down on the ground floor. I asked a number of people to carry out specific tasks for me to resolve it. So one of the ways was I remember tasking Gareth Cook to go around the building to see if we could get a turntable ladder up. So a turntable ladder not only can act as a rescue platform, but has got a fixed line which can act as another dry riser. So what I asked was to Gareth to see if we could get a TL up. We could get the TL up to around the 8th, smash it through a window. That would also be another means of escape, and we could get jets off the TL. So if we could do that, that means we could get an additional water source. So that was kind of one plan, and another plan was to also go around and just double check. I was and I had this conversation with Richard. We were just really concerned that we'd covered all bases. Was there a bit of fixed installation we could use? Was there another secret stairwell around the building? Was there a void we could use? So we tasked someone to pretty much go around every single cupboard, every single door. We didn't want to be at this job in 2 hours and kind of someone went, ta-da, look what you've missed. Yeah. So we pretty much tried everything.
Just going back to my point about water, though, does the fact that you were using extensions up to floor 7 and 8 mean that you weren't getting water above those floors?
Internally, no.
Right. And there's a reference later on in your statement to getting hoses attached to risers on the 9th floor. But was that later in the incident?
Yes.
How much later in the incident?
So that was purely dependent on firefighting and knocking down those floors to enable us to get to that riser, which was in the lobby. So there was, an unbelievable amount of work, and the firefighters, did some incredible work just to get us to able to use those risers.
Now I'm looking at the time. I'm going to come now to look specifically at your role while the bridgehead was on the 3rd floor. Mr. Chairman, that might be a convenient moment for a break.
It sounds like it would, yes. But Mr. Goulbourne, we're going to have a break now, so we can all get some lunch. Please don't talk to anyone about your evidence while you're out of the room. And we'll resume at 2 o'clock, please.
Thank you.
If you'd like to go with the usher, she'll show you out. Good. How are you getting on, Mr. Millett?
Oh, very well. We'll finish well within the afternoon, or within the afternoon anyway.
Yeah. Good. Thank you. 2 o'clock, please.